Hello and welcome to the Blue Open Studio tutorial video series. The topic of this video will be custom widgets. In this video, we will discuss what are custom widgets and how to create and configure a custom widget. We will demonstrate creating a web browser custom widget. In Blue Open Studio, custom widgets are similar to the ActiveX and .NET controls that we have available. The only difference is that the widgets are created and modified during development by the user. They are typically used as web interfaces in order to retrieve data from a website or a web service. And the custom widgets are integrated into an application in two phases. In the first phase, we create the custom widget and add it to the project library. This creation procedure includes designing the custom widget name, properties, and events through the standard IDE. And the implementation of the custom widget functionality is done by editing two files, an HTML file and a JavaScript file. And then in step 2, we add instances of the custom widget into the project screens and link it to its properties and events for application tags or scripts. Okay, we will now demonstrate how to create a custom widget. So in the development, I will go to our Project Explorer. I will make sure I'm on the Graphics tab and I'll expand my screens. We will first create the screen that will display or show the custom widget. So I will open my template screen and then go up to the application menu and save this as a new screen called widget. Once I do that, the template screen is closed and the widget screen replaces it. And now we will create our custom widget. And to do that, I'll make sure I'm on the graphics tab of the application menu. And then under libraries to the right, I will click on custom widget and I will see the custom widgets dialog. And I will click on new. And now I'm able to configure the basic properties of the custom widget. So I'll give it a name. I'll call it my web browser. And I will leave the height and the width set at 100. These are the default dimensions for the custom widget when it's placed on the screen. We can resize it afterwards, so it's not locked into the dimensions we set here. But it is important to remember what you enter in here for when we configure the HTML file in a little bit. And now I will need to add in a property. So I'll click add and I will give it a name of URL. And what this property is it will be the URL or the web link that we will be accessing through the custom widget. And now I'll add an event and I will call this event page loaded. And this will be a counter that will increment every time a web page is loaded in or refreshed on the custom widget. I now have the basic components for the custom widget configured. So we'll click OK. And now you see that we have our brand new custom widget we created listed. I will highlight it and click OK, and it's now placed on the screen. I'll bring it down to the lower right-hand corner. And I will resize it to take up a good majority of the screen. And now we'll just need to add in a few more screen objects to finish this off. The first will be a text box that will show or we're able to type in the URL we want to access. When I open this up, I will click on the object finder to the right of the tag expression field, and I will look for URL. And I see that I have 3 tags created already, so I want to create a new tag. So if I click on new, I bring up the new tag, and I'll give it a name of URL tag 4. And set this as a string type and click OK. And then I will select it to add it in to our text box. The next object will be a button. I will shrink down my text box a little bit because we'll have to put in some objects on either side. And we'll click on button and then click and drag to the left of the text box I just put in. And then I will bring up its properties. And for the caption, I'll just put in the word go. And then I will click on command to add command animation to it. And I will use the on up. And I will type in the command that we want to use. And what we need to do now is we need to configure this button to assign the URL that we enter into the text field to the URL property of the custom widget. So I am going to create a new tag called Go URL. I'll make it equal URL tag 4. Once I type that in, I'll right click and select check script. And it says that the Go URL does not exist. Would you like to create this tag? Click yes. And I create it as a string. Now the script is okay. So what we're doing here is, just as I said, we're taking the URL that we enter into our text field, which is the URL tag value, and we are going to assign it to a new string tag called Go URL. All right, and I'm just going to move my text box over a little bit. And the next thing is I want to put a rectangle down that will show the counter, the page loaded counter that we've created. So I'll open up the properties and click on caption. And inside of curly brackets, I am going to type in page loaded. Then I will click OK. And then it says that the tag page loaded doesn't exist. Would you like to create it? Click yes, and I'll create this as an integer. So what we've done is we've created our button and our text box for accessing the URL and displaying it on the custom widget, and then a display for the counter for the number of pages that have been loaded. So as far as the application is concerned, the web browser custom widget is created. The only thing that is left is to configure the two external files, the HTML and the JavaScript file, in order to use the custom widget. So what I will do first is on the database spy, I will find a blank field and I will use a built-in function called get app path, then open and close parentheses. And what this does is it gives me the path of the application file. So I will copy that path. I'll open up Windows Explorer. And then I will paste that in. And it'll bring me to my application directory. And then from here, we have to find those two files. So whenever custom widgets are created, they're placed in the web folder of your application directory. So if I double click on web, we'll now see a folder called widgets. We double click on that, we come in and we see my web browser. When I double click on that, I come in and I see three files. The two that we need to modify are the custom_widget.js and the index.html. So the first one that we will modify is the index.html. And what I recommend using is a program called Sublime Text. And there will be a link included in the description of the video. What this program is a text editor, but it helps keep code a little more clear by color coding it based on its properties. So I will snap this to the right and then snap my window to the left. And then I will simply drag the index.html file over to the Sublime Text window and it opens up. Now, editing these two files requires some additional knowledge or expertise that unfortunately we will not be able to cover in this video. and it has to do with being able to write or edit both HTML code and JavaScript code. So if you are going to use custom widgets, I highly recommend either getting someone who has experience with it, or at least going through some tutorials online on how to code or read HTML or JavaScript. A great resource for this is W3 Schools, and once again, we will include that link in the description of the video. It's a nice place to look at sample codes and examples of what you can do inside of HTML and JavaScript, along with other programming languages like SQL. So once we have it open, we will need to modify a few items. So the first thing that we'll want to do is we'll actually need to delete quite a bit out of this for our purpose, for what we want to use. So what I will do is, after the head tags, when it comes to the body, I will remove everything from line 9 down to line 15. And then I will add in a new line of code, the I. And the great thing about Sublime Text is it brings up some autocomplete fields. So as you see here, I'm typing in and it shows that a suggestion of iframe, which is what I want to enter in. So if I hit the enter key, it completes the rest of the code for me and puts my cursor where I need to enter in the remainder of my information. Unfortunately for this one, we don't need to use the source. So I will delete all of that and I will add in the proper code that I need, which is ID equals, and inside of double quotes, my frame, space, and then style, and then inside of double quotes, width. And this is where those dimensions we entered in when we created the custom widget come into play. We set the width and the height each at 100. So what we are doing here is, since we're creating a web browser, most web browsers have what's called a frame. And the frame is the displayed area for the web page. Most Windows have this as well. And what you'll see with them is you'll see a thin border across the sides and usually the bottom. And all that is the remainder of the object that is outside of the frame. It's essentially the border. So what we want to do is we want to create our custom widget and we want to leave a little bit of a border there. So we know that the width, the total width of the custom widget is 100. I want the frame to take up the majority of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in 98 and then VW. What that is that's telling it I want it to take up 98 pixels of the 100 pixels we configured. And the VW stands for value width, meaning that this is the width that we want to configure. Then after that, still inside of the double quotes, I'll put in a semicolon and then type in height. And then for the height, we want to do the same thing, 98, and this time it will be VH for value height. We now have our index.html file configured. One thing that we want to keep in mind are two parameters that are entered in here. The first is the title, my web browser, and the second is the ID we put in here, my frame. Those will come into play when we configure the JavaScript file next. So I will close the index.html and I will save it. And then I will bring in the custom widget JavaScript file. And as you can see, this is far more complex than the HTML file was. There are a couple of locations inside of this file that need to be edited. So the first is this proxy.on on line 11. And what we see in here is the property name parameter. We're going to replace that, still inside of the double quotes, with the property that we created, URL. What this is doing is this is saying that when the custom widget loads or opens, it will assign this property, or it'll read in this property into the custom widget. Next is just after line 17, we see that there is this callback. And what we need to do is we need to enter in some additional code here. So I will put in a blank line, tab in, and then I'll type in var my frame, which is the ID that we gave in the HTML file, and equals document.getElementById, and then inside of parentheses, also inside of double quotes, will be my ID again, my frame. And then at the end, semicolon, because with every line of code in JavaScript, you have to terminate it with a semicolon, or else kind of like how this var is on here on line 17, we're essentially creating an encapsulated function inside of JavaScript. So now what we need to do is on the second line, we have to type in my frame. And now you see once I created the variable, it gets added into the autocomplete. My frame dot on load equals fire event. Semicolon, and then on the next line, my frame dot src, which is short for source, equals info dot value. So what we're doing here is we're creating a variable called myFrame and setting it to a getElementById document called myFrame, which is in the index.html file. Then we're configuring the onload property for myFrame to equal the results of the fire event, which as you see down on line 27 here, is configured as a function. And then the source of myFrame is the property of the info.value. And the info.value is the actual URL that is being loaded in through the HTML and essentially then through the custom widget that we configured. So the last thing that we need to add in is on line 28. We see here that this is the fire event function. And we see that we have this execute command element, and we see event name. So we are going to replace this with the event that we created called page loaded. So whenever this event, this fire event function executes, it will run the page loaded event in the custom widget. So once we have that configured, we're all set. As I mentioned before, this is more complicated than what most users will run into, which is why I highly recommend getting someone who knows JavaScript and HTML to assist if you need to create and use custom widgets. I will now save my custom widgets JavaScript file. And with that, we are all set for using the custom widget. The only thing that's left to do is actually configure the tags inside of the custom widget on the screen. So we'll close Sublime Text and go back into the development. And I'll double click on the custom widget, and you see that the object properties look very similar to how the ActiveX and .NET controls looked. The only difference is we only have a single button called members. If I click on that, it brings up my members, and I have my two categories, properties and events. So for properties, what I'm going to do here is I am going to add in the tag that I created called go URL. And we see that we have an action here, get and set. And we can set it to two different properties. What I recommend is leaving it at a default of set and get. And then under events, for page loaded, what we will do is we will actually configure a script. So if I click on the ellipses to bring up the scripting window, in here where it's going to be a very simple one line, I'll hit the $ to bring up the autocomplete and find my page loaded tag. I'll make that equal to itself plus 1. Now we have our custom widget configured. We have the two external files that are associated with the custom widget configured. The only thing left is to actually configure a virtual directory inside of IIS. We need to configure the virtual directory on Internet Information Services in order to allow the custom widget to access the internet. And to do that, we will have to bring up Internet Information Services, or IIS. So if I bring up my start menu and I start searching for IIS, we see that we have our Internet Information Services Manager. We click on that and it brings that up. IIS will be discussed more in depth in the Thin Client tutorial video. So once IIS opens, I will maximize it and just resize the connections pane on the left-hand side. And what we see here on the connection side is a tree list that starts with your computer name, and then it comes down to sites. And by default, whenever IIS is installed, there is this default website that is created. If I expand that out, I see that I have several different sites underneath it. Now, these are created usually when software is installed. So for example, you see that we have Blue Open Studio here. I have OFS. I have some additional instances of the software as well. And what we need to do is right click on BOS 8.0 in this case, because we're using BOS 8.0, and select Add Virtual Directory. And it comes up with the Add Virtual Directory dialog, and we have to give it an alias. And this alias will be custom widget. And that has to be the name in order for this to work. Why we're doing this is because the way that Blue Open Studio allows access for the custom widget for those HTML and JavaScript files is through IIS. And this links this virtual directory inside of IIS to the application itself, to the custom widget. So the alias name has to be custom widget. And then we set the physical path to the physical location of our application file. Click to browse, go onto my C drive, BOS_training, and it's the path where the APP file is located, not where those JavaScript or HTML files are. So once we do that, I can click on Test Settings, and it comes up and it shows that the passive authentication succeeded. However, I cannot verify the access path to the application. That's because the current user, which is the default or a pass-through user through IIS, does not or may not have access or permission to access that directory. So what I will do is I will put in a specific user's credentials in order to access that. And I will put in my user credentials. Now that I have those in, I will click OK, and then I will test again. And now you see that both have succeeded. This may be necessary depending on the security policies and profile configuration for users on the system that will be running the application. I'll click OK again, And just to be safe, what I will do is I'll go back up to the default website. And you see over here on the right-hand side on this pane, there will be a section called Manage Website. You are essentially running a simple web server on the PC that has IIS. So what we need to do is we need to restart that to refresh or reload what we just created. So I will click on Restart. And it's very quick, but you see that it quickly went gray and then became active again. That restarted the website. And you'll see over on the left-hand side on the connections tree, our custom widget virtual directory that we've created. So I'll minimize that. And back on my development, I will save. Close my custom widget screen, and then bring up my navigation screen and add my button to get to the new screen. I'll copy the .NET button, and then just change the open function, and then click on the back to button to change the caption. And then I will close it and save. And then I will start the runtime. Then once it comes up, I'll snap it to the right and snap my development to the left. And then click on my button to go to my custom widget screen. And you see that the counter already incremented by 1, and that's because it loaded in a page. It's blank and it doesn't have a URL to it, but the custom widget, the frame itself, loaded in a page. So now on my text field, if I click, I'll bring up my virtual keyboard, and then I will type in the URL, and I need to include the HTTP in front of it. So for example, http://www.schneiderelectric.com. Once I enter it in, I click go, and the page has loaded. And you see now that the counter incremented again to show that the page loaded successfully and completely. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact ProFace America Technical Support by phone at 1-800-289-9266, option 2, or by email, support@profaceamerica.com. You can also visit our website, profaceamerica.com, for drivers, manuals, FAQs, and other product and software information. Thanks again, and have a great day.